Good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a great weekend. Spring is only 12 days away. I'm starting the countdown because I'm super excited for a different environment. We hope you all received your Tim Horton e-cards on Friday, and hopefully some of you decided to pick up breakfast this morning. My name is Lisa DeRocher, and on behalf of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, we're thankful that you've chosen to spend your first working hour with us to celebrate International Women's Day. Although it wasn't possible to get together in person this year, I am very hopeful that we will have that opportunity next year. Choosing to challenge has been especially relevant when reflecting on this past year of challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of the most glaring challenges worldwide have had the greatest impact on women, girls, and gender diverse people. It is important that we continue to challenge for the rights to safety, choice, participation in decision making, and access to equality for everyone, everywhere. International Women's Day is a major day of global celebration for the economic, political, and social achievements of women, past, present, and future. It is a day in which women from around the world will unite in thoughts, prayers, struggles, hopes, and dreams. Women's accomplishments in education, business, science, art, medicine, public service, athletics, and every other field have made our world better and stronger. Today, we celebrate the women in our lives. They are the cornerstones of our communities, working tirelessly and making countless differences in the lives of those around them. We honor the women of the past, those who stood up for change and fought for the rights that we live and enjoy today. The women of the present, those who have joined us today, and those women around the world who use their voice to help make our world a better place for women. And of course, the women of the future, those who will continue to champion women's voices, to break barriers and keep visible women's achievements in place. Today, we unite to make the women of the past proud, the women of the present inspired, and provide the women of the future with vision. We are going to begin our program. If you're posting on social media this morning, feel free to use the hashtags that are displayed on the screen. We'd love to follow the conversation. I'd like to take this time to recognize today's sponsors. These fabulous ladies continue to support programming to inspire and lift women in our community. Our leadership sponsors today are Cambridge Pool Supplies, Collaborative Structures Limited, JD Development Group Corp., and our very own Nicole Pereira of the Growth Academy, who is also a very dedicated board member of the Chamber and friend. Our community builders, Cornerstones College Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning, Colleen of Dumfries Mutual Insurance Company, Energy Plus Inc., Graham Matthew, Paul Mann Professional Corporation, RBC, and RLB. I also want to recognize some of our community dignitaries that are with us today, three of whom are females that hold the highest positions in municipal leadership in our region. City of Cambridge Mayor Catherine McGarry, Township of North Dumfries Mayor Sue Foxton, Chair of the Region of Waterloo, Karen Redmond, and City of Cambridge Councillor Nicholas Ermata. Thank you for attending. At this time, I am excited and I'd like to introduce today's special guest, Laura May Lindo, MPP for Kitchener Centre. Laura May is a respected activist and educator who holds both a master's and PhD in education. Her commitment to building inclusive communities both within and outside of the educational environments is grounded in her knowledge of how to put anti-oppression theories into practice. Laura May is a knowledgeable advocate for the rights of women and girls, a respected ally to marginalized community members, and most importantly, a courageous public speaker on issues often left unaddressed in the mainstream. Laura May is the official opposition critic for anti-racism and citizenship and immigration. The leader of the official opposition appointed her as chair of official opposition's First Black Caucus to collaborate with Black communities and allies to address systemic anti-Black racism in Ontario. Welcome, Laura.
Hello and happy International Women's Day, everybody. Woo! So I have written and rewritten my notes a billion times. And I think part of it is because this particular International Women's Day in the midst of a pandemic is so difficult and important. And the conversation that we're about to have is one that I don't want to mess it up. And so because I'm a little bit nervous, for those that have never heard me speak before, I often do this weird thing where I sing songs. And so I'm going to actually calm myself by grounding myself. I'm part of a tradition that started in Nigeria, through the slave trade, went to Cuba, and then to North America. And in that tradition, there are a variety of energies that we speak of and call on in order to help us to stay grounded and focused, and to sort of infuse what we are about to do with a little bit of strength. So if I can just take a moment to ground myself, I hope you don't mind. I promise it will not be too long. Here we go. Choosing to challenge. What a theme in the midst of a pandemic. What a theme. So I want to start off by talking about what it means to me when I think of choosing to challenge. And when I think of that, I often think about the lessons and teachings that have come from my own ancestors. So my mummy, not too long ago, was talking to me about something that she had been told by my great-grand-gran. My parents are from Jamaica, and great-grand-gran used to say, "Bear up, me good tree, bear up." And so the idea was we have to be strong as women. We have to be strong and solid to keep fighting against the systems that are trying to keep us down. So bear up, be strong, gather that strength. And so I want to start there, because when I think about what it means to me to choose to challenge, there's three big pieces. First, I have to name the systemic barriers. The systemic barriers impacting women's leadership, and the systemic barriers impacting diverse women's leadership. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The second is what some people will call calling out. In my world, I say it's calling in. It's by recognizing the barriers, speaking openly about what they are, speaking about the nuance of those barriers, and figuring out where the system is perpetuating the lack of leadership for women, or the lack of pathways to leadership for women. And the third thing, which I think is actually key and the most important, proposing solutions. I don't think that there is any point for any of us to choose to challenge if we're not willing to get creative with finding a solution to address the issues that we are facing. And so I'm going to actually, I hope you don't mind joining me as I walk through those three things this International Women's Day 2021 in the midst of a pandemic. So what am I seeing? I'm going to name some of the systemic barriers that I'm actually seeing to women's leadership. And I'm going to start with something that literally just happened. I don't know about you, but I start my mornings with a coffee and then I go to Twitter, because apparently that's where all the cool kids hang out. So here I was on Twitter, and there was a CBC article that was talking about an RBC study that happened just last Thursday, so March 4th, 2021. And what they found was that women were bearing the brunt of the pandemic. They were looking specifically at job loss. So I just want to share a couple tidbits of information that this RBC study was raising. So one, working age women are leaving the workforce at a rate 10 times higher than men. This is 2021, my friends. In 2021, nearly 100,000 women have been forced to leave the workforce since the pandemic began. That's across Canada. 100,000 women have had to leave the workforce since the pandemic started. Part of what the RBC study explained was that a lot of the reasons for why that choice to leave the workforce was happening was because of inadequate childcare and because of low wages. So women, we often hear, are on the front lines of this pandemic. In fact, at Queen's Park, I'm often told that women are the heroes and sheroes on the front lines. And we know this is true. We know that women are primarily PSWs, taking care of elders. We know that racialized women make up a large portion of the PSWs and the frontline healthcare workers. We know that primarily women are in our childcare system, in our daycares, that they are the ones that are teaching our children and our community's children. We know that women are often the folks that are part of the lower wage group, and that there's a big gap. So for instance, we are cleaners at hotels. We are working in the grocery stores and the pharmacies on those front lines. And during this pandemic, a lot of different things happened. The fight for PPE to ensure that frontline healthcare workers were safe was a fight for women. The fight to ensure that any of these closures that we had to do, I mean, it's public health recommendations, and we don't want to increase the spread of COVID. So it makes sense when we are told that we've got to stay at home and businesses have to close. But the impact of not investing in people and communities is on our shoulders as women in 2021. Because when the investment from government doesn't come to us, that means that we are spending at times it's been a full year for some folks who have not been able to work, who have not received the opportunity to keep up their skills. And so what happens when the economy opens up again? When the economy opens up again, I fear that we are going to end up in a place that we have been before. Where is that place, you ask? I'm sure that's what you're saying. You're like, where is that place, MPP Lindo? Where is that place? The place is one where workplaces look at the stop of our work. So they will look at my CV or my resume, and they will see, well, for 1 year, Laura May wasn't working. Well, if she wasn't working, then she's not committed to work. She's not committed to this particular job. She's not committed. And essentially what happens, and this is the system, and this is part of what I think the calling in or calling out is at its core, the assumptions that get made because of the impact of the pandemic lay upon our shoulders as women. And so what does great-grand-grand say? She says, bear up, me good tree, bear up. We have to strengthen ourselves and strengthen each other by saying, no, that's not correct. And in fact, I was not, or women on the front lines were not choosing to leave the workforce during the pandemic. They were pushed out of the workforce during the pandemic. There's a very big difference. So I'm going to say it once more. Women were not choosing to leave the workforce during the pandemic. They were pushed out. They were pushed out because we primarily are the ones to have to stay at home when schools closed. And when we had to stay at home and we didn't have sufficient access to paid sick days or a leave that would allow us to both get enough money to feed the children and pay the mortgage or pay our rent, and also be at home so that we could be there to care for our little ones, we were often having to face a choice of, do we keep the job or do we protect our family? and we protect our family. And so as we protected our family, we were pushed out of the workforce. When things start to open up and people are looking for those that have new, cutting edge skills, will they look at this lost time, the gap during this pandemic, where women were forced to make this choice as their individual choice? Or will they look at this as this isn't the impact of the pandemic? Which leads me to something else. Once upon a time, I worked at Ryerson in the Diversity Institute. And so that was under the leadership of Dr. Wendy Sukier. And part of my role there, the Diversity Institute was actually housed in the School of Business at Ryerson, the Ted Rogers School of Business and Management. And we used to do a whole ton of research studies on leadership, who's in positions of leadership, where are women in those positions of leadership, where are racialized women in these positions of leadership. And time and time and time and time again, we would see that women, even if an organization had done everything within their power to increase the number of women in the organization, they wouldn't necessarily increase the pathway to leadership. And so when we looked more deeper and we looked at visible minority women, which at the time was the language that was being used, we would see that they were even less likely to be in those positions of leadership. Now, this is some years ago that this research was going on, and people had done all sorts of different things trying to ensure that we increase the number of women in leadership positions. But I'm going to bring us back to this study, this RBC study on March 4th. In that study, they said there is an uneven recovery. Job losses are worse for certain demographics. Can you guess which demographics? I'll let you ponder for a moment. Here you go. I'll give you the answer. Mothers, visible minorities, young people, and new immigrants. For those groups, the recovery, this discussion about economic recovery, without a focus on a she recovery, which means an investment in women, ensuring that we have what we need to sustain the ongoing waves of COVID-19 and this pandemic, is uneven for us. That is being put on our shoulders. We are having to make difficult choices again and again and again in 2021. And so there I've spent some time talking about gender biases in the recovery. I think it's really important that we start to speak very explicitly and come together, not just as women, but as all the people, to say what we need is to see an investment in women and an investment in the women that are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And that means taking a deep breath and saying, we've got to invest in newcomer women. We've got to invest in young women. Do you know there are a number of women who are in post-secondary, and because of businesses having to close, they aren't able to do the co-op placements that are part of their programs. And so because they aren't doing those co-op placements, they aren't able to gain the skill set that for women, we have to already have coming into a job. For men, historically, they can learn on the job. They're actually given a lot of space to learn on the job and make mistakes and grow within that field. But for women, we have to do extra. We have to work harder, longer, faster. We have to be stronger, better prepared, ready for the front lines. And so if we aren't investing in post-secondary, for instance, and ensuring that everybody within the post-secondary sector has access to what they need to be able to have the skill set to get into the job market, then we are not, in fact, doing anything to address this uneven recovery from the pandemic. With that, I want us to remember one little lesson. Because we're not choosing to leave the workforce, I've decided to choose to challenge. Look at me, little play on words for our theme today. Because women aren't choosing to leave the workforce, I'm going to choose to challenge instead for International Women's Day 2021. And I hope that you will all come and also choose to challenge alongside me. And so what does that actually look like? Well, for me, it looks like proposing some pretty solid solutions. Now, I've often talked to folks about recognizing that the system wants women to feel like we are disempowered, right? And so we spend a lot of time talking about the barriers, and the idea from the system is that we should feel really sad that we have all of these things working against us, and sort of cower at the strength of these systems and these barriers. And I'm going to challenge that too. Today, I'm in a challenging kind of mood. So I'm going to challenge that too. I believe very, very strongly that we are all empowered if we just pay close attention to our sphere of influence. Where is our power? Who can we talk to? Who is in our circle and our network that we can speak to bring alongside us as we fight to ensure that there is a real investment in women, and that we take seriously the needs of folks who are on the front lines, who are experiencing a disproportionate impact of COVID-19, and that need targeted supports to ensure that they have a bridge to get from where we are now during this pandemic to where we want to be when it comes to economic recovery. I spent, I think it was like over 600 hours in this Finance and Economic Recovery Committee, where we listened to various people, many of whom are actually with us in this call today, who were talking about what was happening to their sectors during that first wave of the pandemic. And the idea was that we were supposed to take that information and build a strategy to address the kinds of needs that folks have right now. We listened to literally over 600 hours of people telling us what was happening on the front lines. The number of women who were entrepreneurs and small business owners who had to shut down because of a variety of reasons, not just the pandemic, but also some of the policies and such that were in place as the government was trying to organize. We heard from them time and time again that there were certain things that they needed. They needed direct investment. Racialized women in particular needed direct investments. If they were business owners, they were having trouble going to the bank and just getting a loan to sort of weather the storm of the pandemic. And they were having a hard time getting that loan, not because of them, but because the system often sees Black folks as not worth the investment, and so they wouldn't get approved for loans. The Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce came out quite strongly and vocally and said, we need direct investment for Black business owners, right? There were a number of people who talked about the need to increase the wage of PSWs on the front lines. So we saw what happened as the pandemic just the rampage in our long-term care homes and the long-term care sector, the senior sector. And we realized, once again, this is something that we've been fighting for quite some time as women as well. But what was realized was that PSWs were being so underpaid that they had to cobble together enough to pay their rent and make ends meet. And so they were having to work at a couple different homes, which during the pandemic was not allowed. So there was a piece of legislation that was crafted to ensure that they can't go from home to home. And yet, if they didn't go from home to home, these were women on the front lines who may not be able to pay their rent or stay housed in a pandemic in 2020 and now 2021. And so what are some of the things that we can fight for? We've got to fight for an increase in wages for the frontline healthcare workers, who we know are primarily women of color. We need to fight for an increase in their wages. We need to make sure that we have paid sick days. We need to make sure that people can do what public health requires and not actually have their lives be on the line because they can't pay for their housing, their food, their whatever supports they need for their little ones if they have families, etc. Right? We need to make sure that we implement paid sick days in Ontario. We need to bulk up, bolster, and invest in a really solid childcare strategy. Because again, if we want the women that have been laid off, who are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, to be able to re-enter the workforce, then we've got to make sure that they have what they need. And so for me, this is the proposing of the solutions. What I promise to all of you, what I promise to all of you is that when I am at Queen's Park, I will keep speaking up and speaking out and demanding investment in us. That is my commitment. That is what choosing to challenge means to me. Because in my sphere of influence, it's actually the legislation that moves our communities forward. And so within that sphere of influence, I will keep fighting to make sure that women are centered in these discussions, that racialized women are centered in these discussions, that newcomer women have what they need to be able to thrive and be supported, that young people have what they need to build their careers and their communities. I will spend my time at Queen's Park using all of the tools available to me to be able to ensure that that investment happens. So my question to you is, who is in your sphere of influence? How can you join me in this call to ensure that we invest in the women who are disproportionately impacted by COVID? What can you do differently to ensure that you're also fighting to push this forward so that women have what they need to be able to thrive? What is it that you can do, or who can you speak to, or who can you write to, or who can you call, or who can you email, or who can you tag on Twitter, or who can you to make the change that we want to see in this world? Because my great-grand says, bear up, my good tree, bear up, which means find that strength. And the strength comes in creative spaces. The strength comes to us in creative ways. Our sphere of influence is often a lot bigger than we actually think. Sometimes it's just a dinner conversation with a good friend who happens to know somebody who happens to know somebody who would be able to ensure that there is money invested in women and young women in particular, or that can make sure that there are programs available for us to retool and pivot as women so that we can get into the workforce, so that this year isn't considered by the system wasted. And I want to be really clear. I am not saying that this time is wasted. We are doing exactly what we need to do. We're following public health protocols, and we're following what we need to make sure that we address the realities of the pandemic. We're protecting our health and our being, and that's really, really important. But the system, there is a tendency in the system to blame us as women for not achieving what we need to achieve in order to thrive. And I will push back when I'm at Queen's Park to make sure that people know that the system did that and that we built the system so we can change the system. We built the system so we can change the system. That, for me, is choosing to challenge.
Seré bata seré yo, bobola hiya seré. Seré bata seré yo, bobola hiya seré.
Happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, Laura May. That was awesome. You do have a fantastic voice.
It's my backup. My
Oh.
backup career if this political thing falls through.
Oh, perfect. So you're thinking ahead. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to take some questions from the floor. So if anyone has any questions for Laura May, please enter them in the chat box or the Q&A area. Melissa's going to be watching for them. In the meantime, I have some questions for you that I had prepared had I been given the opportunity to ask them. Laura May, what do you think the most significant barrier to female leadership is today?
The most significant barrier to female leadership. I actually think one of the most significant barriers is that people don't invest in us. And so I've never had to speak about the importance of investment in particular people or groups as much as I've had to in this new role as a member of provincial parliament. There seems to be a disconnect between the kinds of safeguards that we need and social systems that we need to be able to enter into the workforce, And because people see, for instance, investment in childcare and daycare as separate and apart from women's leadership and our ability to navigate in our jobs, or to regain certain skills if for some reason we've been off for a bit, or to retool if we have to sort of pivot. Like right now, we're in this digital market. There are a lot of people that don't necessarily have the skill set to keep up with this, our new digital life.
Mhm.
But if I don't have access to childcare, then as a woman in the world, like I'm a single mummy with 3 kids, if I don't have access to reliable childcare, then I can't fully commit myself to investing in what I need to invest in to be able to enter into these leadership positions. And so I say all of that to say, I feel like the biggest barrier to our success, the system might say it's us, and I say it's not. It's the system that doesn't think that childcare is important. It's also a system that doesn't think that the kinds of jobs that we primarily see women in should be paid at a decent livable wage. So that brings me to the PSWs,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't make any kind of sense that I'm still in 2021 fighting at Queen's Park for a $4 an hour wage raise for PSWs. You can't call us heroes and then not provide what they need to be able to do that work.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, never thought about it that way when you made the hero connection, for sure. What are the biggest challenges of the next generation for women?
Um, that's a really, really good question. I think so. My critic portfolios have changed. Well, one of them changed. So I'm still the anti-racism critic, but now instead of citizenship and immigration, I'm actually colleges and universities. And so I've been thinking a lot about the investment in post-secondary. I think that, again, not investing in post-secondary will become one of the biggest barriers for young women. And I say that because when I was growing up in Scarborough, and I was in high school there, I got a job in high school before I graduated. I had a job, right? Nowadays, people need a BA to get just like a minimum wage, starting their life, figuring out what it's like to work, right? So if we don't ensure that OSAP loans, for instance, are turned to grants, that's one of the things that we've been fighting for. If we don't ensure that kids and young women graduate from university with less debt as opposed to more debt, they're not going to be able to navigate this job market. They're not going to be able to be part of this economic recovery that we're all talking about post-COVID. And so I really, really think, and again, it always keeps coming back to this investing in community, investing in women, investing in the people that are most impacted by what we're dealing with now. I have a really hard time separating out questions about what the next generation will need from the realities of what we're navigating right now. And I do have, to be honest, a lot of women who have contacted my office, and they have had to leave their degrees because they can't afford to keep paying for OSAP, and not necessarily getting a freeze on that, and not having access to some work while they're in school, right? Because in a lot of areas, things are still not open. So I think that lack of investment, again, in that younger generation is a huge, huge barrier. But I'm hopeful, because there are a lot of people are speaking out, including the young people themselves, are like saying, this isn't okay. It's 2021. I deserve better, do better. And I'm with them on that one.
Yeah, yeah, and they're willing, they're definitely willing to let us know how they feel and think these days, aren't they?
That's right.
We have a 19-year-old, and I keep stressing to her how important it is for her as a female to educate herself, because it's, in my view, it's one of the greatest tools as a female that she can have going forward. What will you learn today, and how will you share it with others?
You know, I think that what I am going to focus on today, and what I've learned today in particular, is that we are worth in the investment. Like we're worth fighting for, which is a weird thing to say, but sometimes during International Women's Day, we celebrate the successes of individual women who have been able to break barriers and glass ceilings and all of that kind of stuff. But when we do that, there's this weird subconscious voice inside of our head that's like, well, they could do it, but we couldn't, right? Like this person was able to get there, but I'm not worth that, or I'm not worth that investment. And I've been realizing more and more and more that we have to start changing that dialogue in our head as well. We are worth this investment. I'm telling you, as the member of provincial parliament for Kitchener Centre, you are worth this investment. You are worth the fight. You are worth any of these kinds of issues and systems that we're trying to change. You are worth that change. And the problem isn't you. The problem is the system, which we created. So there's the hope. And since we created it, we can recreate it differently.
Yeah.
Which leads me, one last thing about that. One last thing is that people have often said during the pandemic, I can't wait to go back to normal, but normal hasn't been working for so many of us. And so I want us to create a new normal, right? And I think we can do that. And I think that there are a lot of people on board that want to do that alongside us. And so that's the hope that I'm going to bring in for the rest of my day.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has forced us to think differently. And I think as women, we know that things can be done differently now. So this is our opportunity to make sure that we go forward in the new norm that works for us.
Yep.
What is your definition of success?
My definition of success, I'm going to put one word to it. It's passion.
Mm-hmm.
It's passion. I think as soon as you find that thing that you're passionate about, it's like everything falls into place. And we're so accustomed to sort of doing things and thinking the road has to be hard and you have to be unhappy and you should hate going to work. But I think that we should love it. I think that we should do what we're passionate about and then watch everything, the ripple effect of that. So that is definitely my definition.
Yeah, life is too short to be doing something that you don't want to do, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a strong believer that we were all placed on earth with a purpose. And, it's finding that purpose, that passion that you speak of. So on that note, what is your purpose in life? What do you believe your purpose is?
I think that my purpose is this sounds so hokey, but I think that my purpose is to put more love into the universe in all of these different ways. Like, I think when I talk about these investments in communities that don't necessarily have a seat at the table or an opportunity to speak to people in positions of power and leadership about what they need, and I do that work to bring their concerns to Queen's Park or to whatever other leadership table I have to bring it to, it's putting more love into the universe. It's putting more hope into the universe. Yeah. And I think that there's so many different ways. When I look at the kinds of things that I've encountered in my own journey to get me here, a lot of it has been just that consistent desire to put more joy and love and hope into the universe. And I think that that's such a powerful tool, which is also something that we kind of, it's not so important. I mean, I think I even started it with, it's so hokey. So I did it too, right? Yeah. But the reality is, I think putting that kind of love and care into the universe is what is going to help us to survive, especially during the harder times, especially at a moment like this where we're in this pandemic. And that would truly mean that we're in it together if we can love each other enough to invest in the folks that need it most.
Yeah, we have to be there for one another. So
yeah.
Okay, Melissa, I think we've got we have a question here in the chat box.
Yes, we do.
Okay, go ahead, Melissa.
I will read off the first part of it. What companies and organizations are very good examples of being very supportive of women and minorities, especially during the pandemic?
Oh, sorry, was it which companies? Was that the question?
What companies?
What companies?
Organizations, yes.
So one company and organization that I think has been doing a very stellar job, to be honest, is Communitech. out in my neck of the woods. But they were doing that and they were committed to that before the pandemic. And I think that that's important to pay attention to, right? So they had like fierce founders and they were trying to find ways to ensure that women entrepreneurs were provided with what they needed to be able to also do their entrepreneurial work, right? And get into this whole sector. Because they were doing this before the pandemic, there was more of an understanding that the pandemic would have a disproportionate impact on women because they already understood that there was a huge gap in women entrepreneurs coming forward to do all sorts of, any of those kinds of programs that would help them with their skill set and growth and et cetera. And so because of that earlier commitment, when the pandemic hit, they were already ready to hold people and ensure that they had what they needed. And in fact, they fought for investments for women and for businesses locally for us as well. When I was speaking to some of the folks there prior to the pandemic as well, there was a clear understanding that racialized entrepreneurs weren't being given the same kinds of opportunities as their non-racialized peers. And so they were already doing some work in that area. And the last thing I would say about them, and the reason why I keep going on and gushing about them, is because they're committed to hard conversations, which has to happen, right? Another local community or a local organization that I feel the same way about is Vidyard. Vidyard was doing a lot of work in town as well, including like inviting me to come and speak about racism and anti-racism work and racial justice and that kind of stuff. And again, we sometimes think that that's off to the side, but when you look right now, we're in crisis in the midst of this pandemic. Who are the folks that are disproportionately impacted and what are some of those barriers? We've got to talk about things like what racism looks like in our own community. And we've got to create pathways to get those people that are disproportionately impacted into these spaces where they too can thrive, right?
Melissa, there was a second part to that question.
Yes, there is. Who can we look to as being good models for systemic improvements that can be replicated in other places and systems? Or if there are no good systemic improvements that come to mind off the top of your head, what are the best examples of initiatives during the pandemic that many of us can emulate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, or participate in.
That's fantastic. That's a great, who is writing that question? Go you. I think you're the kind of person that we should be looking to for systemic change, because the systemic change work starts with asking really solid questions. So we have a tendency to ask questions about things that have gone wrong or when you're doing your problem solving and such. We have a tendency to ask questions that are kind of barely touching the surface of the actual problem, but that question is going straight to the root. So where are some of those examples? Some of those examples are very, very local examples. If you look at some of the kind of work and research that's been coming out of our universities in town, for instance, they have been talking about the root causes of some of these systemic issues. They are the ones that have launched campaigns to address getting a basic income, for instance, or campaigns that talk about the need to increase the amount for folks on OW or ODSP. I'm going to stick a pin in that and just say something, and I promise I'll come back. Before the pandemic, and I believe it was right before the pandemic, it may have been like very, very, very beginning. I was getting phone calls from some people locally that were on ODSP and wanted to start small businesses. They had ideas of some businesses that they could do. It would be a different kind of business because of what they were navigating in their own journeys. But because of the rules around ODSP, if they were to launch that business, they would have all of that extra income clawed back. And so when you have systems set up that don't actually encourage you to move into this business space, to be part of our economic recovery, those systems actually are very, very damaging to folks psychologically and socially, and they do not help in our economic recovery. And so I say all of that to say this. This is a saying that my mommy has. I tell you that to tell you this. I tell you that to tell you this. Anybody who's willing to speak out about those kinds of barriers and keep fighting for to get the attention of people like me on those kinds of issues so that we can change those systems, those are the people that we need. It doesn't have to be like a big, huge organization that's doing stuff or a big, huge march. It has to be it's the everyday people that write to my office and they're like, this system is not working for any of us. And I need you because I elected you, or you are elected because I get both. I need you to change that. I need you to do, that's your job. And I think that those kinds of moments are the kinds that can actually help us to get to the root causes of these kinds of issues that are impacting women more and bringing more of these barriers into play. I hope that helped to answer.
Yes, funny, Laura May, we came across a situation where we had this young mother who had had a child at a young age, and in order to support herself, she had to go on welfare. I'm not sure if it's still called welfare, but she was getting support from the government, and she was trying to better herself. So she went and was educated in childcare. Was successful in finding a job. So she went to work, but then had this child at home, which she could not afford to put into childcare because she wasn't making that much money. So I always find it interesting, or maybe not interesting. I thought it was discouraging that was the opportunity. She was looking for help, and government had the opportunity to help this young lady advance and eventually get off the system, but instead they took away something that would advance that dream of hers. And if I'm not mistaken, she ended up going back on welfare because she had no choice.
Well, and we hear that examples of that cycle over and over and over again. And I guess part of the things that's rather frustrating in this job is that while governments might want to see these as individual issues, so like that one person, this is what happened to her, there's another person over here, that's what happened to her, they aren't connecting the dots.
Yeah.
But it's not just one person that we have to help. If we actually invested in childcare and made it affordable, then we would have a lot of women who would say, you know what, I am going to go and follow my passion and follow my dreams. I also think it's unfair when the broader system turns around and says, well, just do better, right? Just do better. Just work harder. We don't have the systems in place to be able to ensure that people can do that. And that's what I mean about building those pathways, right? And that early investment in addressing those root causes of why we're not in these leadership positions will really, really help.
Yeah. I have a question here from Nikki. In your experience working at Queen's Park, what specific skills do you think that women bring to the political forum table?
That is a very good question. I feel that when I look at what's been happening at Queen's Park, we connect the dots faster. No offense to my male colleagues, but I think when you have experienced barriers to your own advancement, then you're more acutely aware of when a particular piece of legislation will have a ripple effect, right? And so I think that that's one of the things that we bring to the table as women in that space. I would also argue that there's a push to get racialized women into the space as well, right? So it's very difficult for me to speak of myself as a woman without also noting that I am a Black woman in that space. And because of that, I'm able to connect the dots between what it's like to address or to have to address racial justice or experiences of racism, as well as sexism in that space, right? And so because those experiences are now at the table, it makes a difference in the way that I debate or the kinds of questions that I ask or the kinds of things that I'm pushing both within my own party and in the broader government space, right? the last thing that I would say about that is to tell you a little story. I was at a school one day to give a talk. I think it was an elementary school, and a teacher came running over to me and they said, Laura May, I voted for you because you're a single mom and I'm a single mom. And I wanted to make sure that somebody who understood how hard it is to be a single mom was at the table, like at this decision-making table. And I remember thinking, I never actually realized that my being a single mom was a characteristic that people paid attention to and actually paid attention to when they were trying to figure out what they needed in terms of lived experiences at this table. And so what that has resulted in for me is actually sharing that I'm a single mom. Because again, it goes back to this idea that there's shame in me being a single mummy, right? But there is no shame in that. And so when I'm at Queen's Park, I can raise that, which wouldn't necessarily happen if you didn't have a space or an understanding that there are women out there that are single mummies, that are struggling, that are trying to do their best, that do need particular supports. And you didn't take seriously those needs, so then you didn't insert it into your debates. I hope that that didn't go off into all the different places, but I think that that's just some of what we bring, a little bit of what we bring to Queen's Park.
Yeah, Laura May, I so appreciate single parents. I was a single parent for 8 years, and I strongly believe it made me the person that I am today and gave me the strength that was required to advance myself. I truly enjoyed being a single parent because I got to make all the decisions. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions, but we're right on time, so this is we do have one more here. Laura May, as you started and continued to build your political career and influence, what experiences, in quotes, education, job, volunteer, social, etc., have been most important in this position? Where would you recommend women interested in learning more about politics or entering politics start?
Oh, wow, that's an amazing question. So it's going to be a little strange of an answer maybe. I think one of the most influential experiences has been my children in the midst of me doing this job. So because I have been at the decision-making table, I can hear my kids talking to their friends about some of the issues that have come up at Queen's Park. And they're doing it from a place of knowledge because they've seen me advocating for stuff, or they've seen my notes at the house. So for instance, early on pre-pandemic, when the government was going to pull back the health curriculum, and they were going to not do this new curriculum that included discussions about consent and included discussions about LGBTQ communities. One of my kids went to the school board with all of this information, wrote a speech and went to the school board and advocated for the school board to write letters to the government to not allow that curriculum to be taken away. Like that kind of advocacy that I've seen in young people, that has been something that's made me say, maybe it is worth being in this space. Because I gotta tell you, the job is hard, right? Like to all of my other elected officials that are on this call, it does not matter which area of elected officials you are, the job is hard. So I'm sending you folks some extra special love and surrounding you with some of that courage and all that you need to be able to do the job. It is very difficult. And so you need some of that to sustain you. And so for me, it's always looking at the younger generation because I'm not going to be here forever, right? And elections are fickle. You kind of don't know what's going to happen in 2022 when there's another election. I can't guarantee that this is where I'm going to be. But what I can guarantee is in the time that I'm in this role, that I do things with integrity, or as my mummy will always say, you need to wake up and be able to look at yourself in the mirror. Right? You need to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and like what you see. And so I need to make sure that I do that. In terms of what women can do if they're interested in politics, talk to women in politics. Like literally reach out to folks. I never thought that I would be in politics, but now that I'm here, send me an email. I sit down with folks all the time and just talk to them about the experiences, and I guarantee I always talk real talk. So I will tell you the good, the bad, the indifferent, and we can figure out where you need to be.
Yeah, I always say that politicians have got to have thick skin.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Laura May, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. We're thankful for your advocacy for the rights of women and girls. You're an example of what it means to fully accept a challenge, and we are better for having women in leadership like yourself. So thank you. A strong woman who walks the talk every single day. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. As well, a special thank you to everyone that has joined us today, our sponsors who continue to support the Chamber. I will leave you with this thought. A challenged world is an alert world. Individually, we're all responsible for our own thoughts and actions every day, all day. We can all choose to challenge and call out gender bias and inequalities. We can all choose to seek out and celebrate women's achievements. Collectively, we can all help create an inclusive world. From challenge does come change, so let's all choose to challenge. Our next Women Take Charge breakfast is being held on Tuesday, April 27th. We have Joan Fisk, CEO of the United Way Waterloo Region Communities, joining us for a conversation. She is one of my favorite ladies in Cambridge, so I'm looking forward to that. Choose to have a great day, everyone. Choose to challenge. Thank you for joining us today.